It is February and all around the world people are celebrating love. And here at 50 Faces Productions, we wanted to dive in to hear about your loves, where you find passion, excitement, fulfillment and joy. There are lessons there for careers too. In our third episode of the series, which you can find on our separate Intersections channel, we speak with Caroline Kenyon, a broadcaster and serial entrepreneur in the world of food and the founder of the Food Awards company. She's also the co-founder of Food FM Radio. We hear how she started her career as a journalist and found that being cheeky was an essential way to get a foot in the door.
I really began my career by being cheeky, and I don't think I've ever let go of that cheekiness ever since. And I'd had one or two articles published as a student, and I rang the Evening Standard up, and in those good old-fashioned days, you could actually get through to an editor, spoke to an editor, pitched the idea for an article, and this guy said, yes, have a go. And I wrote it and they published it. And thereafter, I would ring editors all over London and the national press and say, I write for the Evening Standard on the basis of one article.
She started her PR firm representing food growers from humble seeds of its own.
I met this farmer who was the biggest grower of chicory and celeriac in the country. And I gave him one of these floppy pieces of paper. And a year later, he rang me and we represented him for about 8 years, which just goes to show you never know when the little seed you've planted is going to sprout.
She speaks honestly and openly about how she made the decision to wind it up.
I wound it up at its peak. It's a bit like leaving a party when it's going really well and not letting it go past the peak when you're crunching on broken glass on the floor. So I feel really proud that I changed the business when we were really flying.
And she then moves to discuss the launch of a food awards business, a food photography award, and a food-focused radio station, Food FM. Our conversation is wide-ranging as Caroline talks about many of the advances in the area of food globally that excite her. One that particularly piqued my interest was her discussion around food and mental health.
I always look at people's faces, and I've been looking at people's faces all my life. And you can see so much about people's health from their face, whether their whites and their eyes are white, or whether their skin is good or bad, or their teeth are good or bad. And I just looked at the health on the faces of these people on the high street, and my heart was broken by it. It really was. And I just so wished I could make a difference to them. But I know that a lot of it was down to diet. The link between diet and poverty is unarguable. So how you tackle that is just so deep and so entrenched, and it's to do with inequalities, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very complex, but I think that that is going to be the most important thing that we will be addressing over the next few years. I'm excited that in the UK, we now are having something called social prescribing. And I don't know if you have that in America, but it's when doctors prescribe things that are not drugs, but they're things like, we prescribe you to go and work 3 hours a week in the allotment gardens run by the such and such charity, or we prescribe you to go and help on a farm 3 times a month. That kind of prescribing, or giving people vouchers for fresh fruit and vegetables. And I feel that's a very exciting new innovation, and I want to hear more of it.
Caroline's podcast is filled with joy and love, and it is hard not to feel excited about where we are on the cusp of a food revolution.
I feel like I'm part of this wonderful international family, but it's an international family where the threads that bind us are all about food. And it's not just a British phenomenon or an American phenomenon. It is truly global, that we're starting to understand properly and deeply about the provenance of food, about the impact of the food industry or food production on the climate emergency, about food and health, food and obesity, food and mental health. There's so much knowledge and study and research and sharing of knowledge that I actually feel this is the most exciting time to be alive in the world of food. I couldn't feel more lucky.
You can listen to the rest of Caroline's podcast through the links on our hub, in the show notes, or on our separate podcast channel. Search for 50 Faces Love on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.